I'm Rod Johnson. I created the Spring Framework. In the beginning, it came out of a book I published way back in 2002.
How many of you were born in 2002?
I'm not sure we can trust them. Let's see. Well, hi, I'm Juergen. So I've been leading the core Spring Framework open source project basically ever since we did the first 0.9 release. Do you remember? A long time ago, in like 2003. Yeah, ever since up until this point. So I'm here to talk about anything old or new, past, present, future. Yeah.
And I'm Josh. I serve in my capacity as their biggest fan now for 15 years, and before that unofficially. Yeah.
So, I think we have a lot of things to talk about because Spring has always really been on the cutting edge of solving problems that are relevant to developers. So, back in 2003, the most pressing problem was obviously building web apps of that generation, but also coping with the absurd complexity that enterprise Java required. So Spring really led the charge in sweeping away that complexity, replacing it with community-driven, open source simplicity, and actually making Java fun for developers. But obviously we're now in 2025 and EJB is a thing of the past. Java EE literally no longer exists. But Spring is out there pushing into new territory with Spring AI, which went final at this show. So there's a lot of things we can talk about, and we want to be driven by you, answer questions, discuss topics that you would like us to discuss. So anything you like, it's your session.
May I do some polling initially to warm us up? So who's been in the Spring ecosystem for more than 10 years?
Oh, wait, yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, okay, thanks for the reminder. More than 15 years? Anyone?
Surely.
Okay, well, that's still quite a few hands. Now we're doing the maximum test, right? 20 years? Or approaching
most of
20.
that, approaching.
You can do a little bit of rounding.
Most of that, yes.
Well, okay. And anyone who's been in the Spring ecosystem for less than 5 years, let's put it like that, right?
Welcome.
Welcome.
Equally welcome, right? So great to see this mix.
Good to see you. What a lovely day.
Mix, right? A healthy community, a healthy ecosystem needs exactly that sort of mix.
I think we should celebrate another anniversary. We just did, right? Today is the 30th anniversary of the birthday of Java. And there's a symbiosis there. I think it's kind of interesting.
Well, I think there totally is, because honestly, I think it is fair to say that without Spring, we would not be talking about server-side Java in 2025. Things were really pretty bad.
Oh yeah, it was. There's nowhere but down with that stack. I remember people fleeing as soon as something even mildly more empathetic. It wasn't better. It was just more empathetic, like Ruby on Rails showed up, and people were looking at that, going, "Well, I need 7 deployer roles to configure an ear to deploy to production."
There's
Only 6
roles.
deployer roles? Oh, well, yeah, like the ceremony versus the...
And then everyone else did not have that ceremony, right? Both in Ruby on Rails, but also in .NET land, things were significantly more developer-oriented than server-side Java was back then, right? So there was huge competition elsewhere. It basically means other languages, other platforms, other ecosystems hosted by them would have taken over.
I think this is actually something that Spring has always done well. I think we've always ensured that we are open to new ideas, whether they come from other Java projects, obviously from our own community, or outside Java. So if you look at Spring Boot, right, convention over configuration, it really benefited from those ideas that came from outside Java. So, that's always been a big thing, I think, in the Spring ethos, that we will adopt other ideas, but we will always acknowledge it. Like, if we take a good idea, we don't pretend we invented it. We acknowledge the fact that we, benefit from the good thinking of other people and other communities.
Yeah. So, couple of questions for the audience here. Who's using Java? Okay. Who's using Kotlin? Oh, that's a sizable... Yeah, him now, right?
Yeah, that's not too bad.
Not bad at all. Now, this is a this is you know,
The self-selection.
bias, self-selection. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're in this conference, you're probably not doing COBOL, right? Like you're, you know, one hopes. Okay, so what else? And so who here, we talked about people who've been in the Spring community. So how many of you, again, started with just Spring Framework? Like and Spring, before Spring Boot, right? That's, who's still using just Spring Framework? Oh yeah, him. He should be the only one who's allowed to raise his hand. This guy, he's the lead. It's the only thing he's, no. The rest of you can, no, I'm just kidding. God, I'm so excited. So, okay. So we talked about 30 years of Java. It's now 21 years almost. No, it is 21 years since 1.0, right?
Yeah, depends on, yeah.
1.0.
So counting from 1.0, it would be 21 years. Counting from 0.9, it's almost 22 since it was in June 2003.
Which means it's old enough to drink
Counting
alcohol
from
in
your
the United
book,
States.
It's even more than that, right? So it's all a matter of where you start from. Anyone remembering a Java 1.3 back then? No, that's what Java was like pre-Java 5.
Yeah.
Is now a distant memory, right? Anyone remembering Java not having generics, not having annotations?
I would just like it not to have type erasure. We still have that.
Yeah. But we take what we get, right? But these days, of course, even that is distant past. So anyone remembering Java not having lambda expressions, right? Like pre-Java 8? That's a distant past now. At least it should be. We're finally in a much more modern incarnation of the platform. So may I also ask? No, Java 8, even that is old. So anyone not on JDK 17 or higher? Is anyone pre-JDK 17 still? Are you bound to anything older? Okay, I'm feeling with you.
And for you.
And the other question: who's looking forward to JDK 25 LTS going live in September? Who's going to upgrade this year still? By the end of this year, who has at least the ambition to? You don't necessarily need to get it signed off. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's my take on the evolution of basically everything, but in particular the Java platform and everything on top of the Java platform is we need to be looking forward to the latest and greatest and willing to embrace it. There's no point in hanging on to a particular state of affairs in the past, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's been very encouraging is somewhat contrary to expectations. I think Java has done much better under Oracle than it did under Sun. And I mean, since I've learned things I didn't know at the time, that Java was woefully under-resourced in the last use of Sun. I mean, it was actually quite terrible. So it was partly resourcing, but it was also partly attitude. Like, broadly speaking, the Sun team had absolutely no interest in what any open source project was doing on Java. Even at that point, like Spring obviously had massive usage. In fact, it was probably the larger part of the Java ecosystem. And the Sun folk had absolutely no interest in listening to us or our community. Whereas that's quite different now.
Right.
I mean, they engage very constructively. And I think that is not only greatly beneficial to end users of Java, but it also, I think, is a strong argument for moving forward as they bring new advances to the language. Like, trying to push, not accepting old versions that are, markedly inferior in the language at this point.
I couldn't agree more. So I have some questions just to make sure we're on the same page, because we've got you here. It's very rare. Why create Spring? Why not become a rich, handsome billionaire instead? Like, why create Spring? What was the...
Why create an open source project?
Yeah, why create an open source project at that time, especially given how hostile Java was at that moment in time to open source, right?
I think things that work and things that grow a community tend to be when a developer is scratching their own itch. So, I just felt the pain and I wanted something that took the pain away. And I think that was true of myself, it was true of Juergen in his role at the time, it was true of all the initial developers and community members. So, I had a problem, I wanted to try to fix the problem.
And did you imagine that 30 or 20 years hence it'd still be thriving and growing? Like, what was your hope for that at the time? Because the dinosaurs of the day were things like struts and,
Anyone seen the documentary Shine a Light about the Rolling Stones? There's this wonderful quote from a very young-looking Mick Jagger in 1965. He says, I think the band's going quite well. I think we've got at least another year. So, no, I had absolutely no idea. Obviously, I think at all points, I and we profoundly believed that we were doing something good and something important, and we're getting great feedback and contribution from the community. But, obviously, we weren't thinking in a 20-year horizon.
Who is, right? And did you imagine that because Java was the language in which it was written, because what else was there really at the time, right? Did you ever imagine there'd be, like we just saw, a good third of the audience here is doing Kotlin?
Actually, probably yes to some extent, because I remember fairly early on there was a Spring scripting module where you could use define beans in a scripting language. It didn't really work tremendously well at that time because there weren't many very good scripting languages on the JVM. This was way before even the present scripting integration. So I remember, writing that and trying to drive that forward. So yes, I was definitely open to the idea.
Okay.
And what's part of the promise of the JVM, right? Was it would allow for other languages to be hosted, but it wasn't exactly delivering on that vision initially, right? It was all very Java language bound, and Groovy came along as kind of the first more like mainstream alternative.
Well, we embraced Groovy early on and vice versa. And then, of course, we tried actually towards the end of my leadership overall of the business, we started investing in Spring for Scala, which was a really good thing.
Oleg
got precisely zero interest from the Scala community because they hate anything to do with Java.
And 2 people from the Java community because it's not Java. But yeah, it was Oleg and then me. That was it. We were the 2 users.
Yeah, we are ultimately trying to do things that are picked up and that where there's some love for it from both sides, right? Yeah. And some active evolution coming from both sides, some interest in taking it forward, and that is definitely there now. With to come back to the present with Kotlin, right? JetBrains has a huge interest in working with us in shaping the future of Kotlin and Spring with Kotlin. In combination.
For those folks who raise their hands and are using Kotlin, were you using Java before and you moved to Kotlin, or were you using some other language? Who was using Java before and then switched to Kotlin? Okay. Now, roughly I have an idea. Now, who came to Kotlin from another language besides Java? Anybody? Oh, interesting. So you didn't look at Java, you just said, well, Kotlin looks more like TypeScript and ECMAScript and whatever, and maybe C# or something like that, and chose that. Is that kind of the idea? Oh, okay. And then, so now you've got you. Why did you join? You could have been like a plumber or something. I don't know.
I was actually trying to convince you to turn it into an open source project back then, right? It wasn't so clear that it would actually turn into an open source project because that's an active commitment. Open sourcing something isn't just dropping a piece of source code to download somewhere. It's a commitment to take it forward, right?
Yeah. You're married.
Initially, the download with the book was basically just that, right? But the commitment, from both of us and a couple of other initial contributors was definitely there, the willingness to take it forward. We didn't quite know how long we would be pushing forward there, but everything needs active evolution, right? Nothing is a single code drop. And you mentioned struts before, right? Even things that were very mainstream and very popular at the time. The initial version of struts was kind of the most popular Java web framework for a number of years, but basically didn't evolve. It was what it was. It didn't really go anywhere further, and it became legacy very quickly.
Well, struts actually is rare among open source projects in that it devolved. So, apparently, I'm an Australian, I'll give you this weird fact. Apparently, koalas have evolved to become less intelligent because in terms of their very strange diet, apparently they evolved so that they're better at digesting these weird leaves, and they sacrifice some brain power in order to do that. Struts was a little bit like that in that Struts, the controller's servlet, the controller was actually an interface, and they changed it to an abstract class. So
the action server.
Yeah.
It's like in the early days, everyone was using Struts, and basically if they picked Spring as sort of a service layer, management framework, data access framework, transaction management framework underneath Struts, the Struts Spring Hibernate stack.
Yeah. Right. Well, remember when Webflow, which was actually a good thing.
Quite good. Who used Webflow?
When that kind of interface was relevant, it was a good project.
Sure.
But it was early on, it really suffered a lot because most of its users were on Struts. So Keith had to support like 2 bindings for Webflow.
That was always weird. But it didn't take very long, right? It was just a couple of years until basically Struts showed the end of its promise. And for further evolution of the web framework, you had to go elsewhere. There was Struts 2, and now a totally different framework, just sharing the name.
You got...
But Spring MVC, that was the time when Spring MVC became mainstream. It was basically after the fading away of Struts. Right?
One strange thing, which I guess is ancient history now, but I think is quite odd, is that a lot of people regarded Spring MVC as this thing. Oh, why does Spring have a web framework? Actually, the genesis of Spring, the whole thing grew out of Spring MVC. So Spring actually started by growing downwards from the web stack, but adoption grew upwards to the web stack.
I think a lot of people brought in Spring and tried to use it in whatever context they could, even if it meant that they had to use Struts and Spring framework. And exactly. You said it's a commitment, and because when it was on an open source project is like a marriage, except you don't say I do, you say I download, and it's different, but it takes time. And you've been doing it for now. You're the lead of Spring Framework now, 21 years.
Long time. For starting mine from the very beginning, it's even like 22 years plus, right? It's quite a commitment. Quite a marriage.
You and Rod and 5 others started the thing. Well, you 2 first, and then some others joined, and the original founders, right?
There was quite some interest on this feedback forum on the Rocks website initially, right? It was the old days. There wasn't really any further channels to discuss this in. But there were quite a few readers from the book kind of seeing the point of taking it onto an open source project. So we had some great help in bootstrapping. But in terms of commitment, longer term commitment, that's a bit of a different question.
Oh, we have questions? Sound
has gone.
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
This one's not making any sound at all.
Is that mic off? Or
this one works?
Mine does not work.
So ours don't work?
Well, that's not great.
Hey. Yeah, sorry. Just wanted to say that we cannot hear you from in the middle here.
Yeah, we...
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, that one, yes,
this
but
one
not
does
the
not
little
work?
ones, I think.
Okay.
Why don't we...
I think it's the person in the middle. We cannot hear his microphone.
Okay.
You can hear yours, right?
Yeah.
Or he's too low.
And you can hear mine.
Yes.
Okay,
Well, that's
what
really all
I
you
think
need to
we
hear.
should do, this would be a good opportunity, I think, to take some questions from the audience while we sort out the technology here.
It is.
And let's turn it over to you.
We should turn it over to
Right.
you.
Yeah.
That's a cue.
Hello. Actually, my question is from Rod. I'm a fan of you from your 3 red books. My question is, when you wrote those books, for me it was obvious that when you were writing the last one, somehow you decided about inventing a Spring Boot, and somehow was disappointed from J2E and EJB and this stuff. My question is, after that you decided to leave and join, I don't remember, board of TypeSafe something. Were you disappointed from Java, then decided to join that one? And recently I saw that your popular language is Kotlin. For example, the new AI agent framework that you wrote is 90-70% written in Kotlin. Yeah, this was 3 questions, but it was about disappointing. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll answer it as concisely as I can. No, there's essentially been two strands to my career since I started Spring. There's the technology stream and then there's the business stream. So, essentially I built the business around Spring.
Test.
Sold to VMware in 2009. And I found that although I still cared deeply about Spring and still do today, being an executive at a large corporation was not really what I wanted to do, which is why I left VMware. And by this point in time, my job was completely different from most of the Spring team. I wasn't involved in code. I was an executive. So then I basically continued the business stream and was on the board of a number of companies in open source infrastructure, including TypeSafe, but also Elastic, the Neo, Graph database. So that was nothing to do with losing confidence in Java. It was to do with trying to help companies go through some of the same journey that we had with Spring. The second question, my new project, the agent framework in Babel, is written in Kotlin. That is true, but it is entirely based on Spring. And I have put in effort to make sure that it is entirely idiomatic to use from Java. So yes, I personally prefer to write Kotlin than Java, but I understand that Java is where most of the Spring community is at. Java is also where most of the enterprise JVM is at, and I will never be one of these people who hate Java. I think Java is a great language that deservedly runs much of the world.
Is my microphone on? Yes. Oh, thank goodness. Okay.
This as well in the meantime, or? Yeah, okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for raising it.
Can I go? Okay.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Nowadays, everybody develops Java application with Spring Boot, tackling the complexity of the framework itself, because I think nobody would like to deeply understand how the framework magic is done. So Spring Boot offers a developer experience where practically you can approach it without even no knowledge. It's very simple to create something with Spring Boot. Would you imagine, as of the initial idea, when you developed Spring Framework 1.0, that things will have simplified so greatly during time?
I don't know if I accept the premise.
Well, I'll do a quick take on that and maybe hand over. So we were in a very different world when Spring Framework 1 started. Applications were enormous. People were building applications that were millions of lines of code. So the idea of automatically scanning the class path and making decisions based on that was not something that was applicable to those applications because they were pretty much all large monoliths. When Spring Boot came into play, it was addressing really a pretty different need for building a different kind of application.
Yeah. There's that, and you remember this whole discussion around convention versus configuration, and I think the alternative at the time had a few features that it purported to be able to do at the expense of inflexibility. And if you wanted to do anything outside the bounds of those very few narrow lines, you were sort of just back to square one. Whereas with Spring, we just said it's a tabula rasa. You can start from an XML file that is empty and add one object into existence and you're good. Or if you want to add transaction management, add yet another object. And for an average app that was a web app that had a few controllers and some transaction management and some persistence, it wasn't terrible. It was fine. It's just things like your database could be auto-configured eventually.
It's also where that code actually lives, where the Spring application context actually lives. So some of the design in the core framework really was inspired by the challenges of the time, every environment being different. In J2E, within a WAR file, everything's different from within an EAR file. Then there's standalone bootstrapping, which basically nobody did. So the design of the framework is almost more like a library in a sense. You could building blocks, you could combine them and integrate them, many SPIs, because you couldn't have made an assumption of this is my transaction management strategy. You were running on a platform, you had to integrate with the platform's transaction manager. Right. You had to integrate with the platform's data source connection pools. Or in a standalone scenario, you would have locally defined data sources and a local transaction manager. So these challenges of the past of a sort, right, J2E platform integration, really led to the design that we have, but it turned out to be very useful and applicable and very flexible going forward from there. Whereas in Spring Boot, the primary point of Spring Boot these days, a self-contained executable, is obviously you can make all the choices you want, right? It's your stack, so you can make simpler and better default assumptions.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. In the very early period, it was about, we are in a hill made by IBM and Sun. We're going to use as much Spring as our boss will let us use to, basically make that livable. Whereas by the Boot era, it was like, wow, we like Spring. What can Spring do to make our whole experience great? And one final thing I would say on this point, which I think is quite important, is there is no Spring Framework and Spring Boot difference, fundamentally. Like, Spring Boot is Spring Framework.
Yeah.
It's obviously a really great way of experiencing and starting with Spring Framework, but underneath, it is not changing anything. Underneath, it is Spring Framework.
It's just more configuration.
Yeah, it's a bit of a, if you look at it from a modern day perspective, you may wonder why there is these separate layers and these many SPIs in there, but it's still very useful, right? Our assumptions back then of not using like XA transaction management for everything was very wise, right?
Which was very controversial.
Right.
Who uses XA transaction management, like two-phase commit, JTA bound transactions these days? It's a totally an anti-pattern, right?
Yeah.
Everyone uses local transaction strategies. So a lot of the things that turned out from this are very useful, or connection pools, choices and setups. The world became more diverse, right? Not everything is JMS bound.
No.
Many messaging systems are not even using JMS at all.
Is it
the modern world very much evolved in a direction that was compatible with our framework design, I would argue.
And I wonder, is there some of it that's informed by the feasibility? Like we can do a lot more dynamically today at speed that maybe wouldn't have been so performant 20 odd years ago on the JVM. Is that
or
fair?
Even possible, right?
Yeah.
In some ways.
We didn't even have CGlib proxies for years, right? Like
no, we had them pretty early.
Yeah.
I mean, but it wasn't there in the 1.0. You had this JDK proxy.
I'm still maintaining a fork of CGlib.
Oh, I know.
20 years.
But my point is, we didn't even have the ability to do concrete classes from the 0.0, 1.0.
It was a much tougher thing to do back then, right?
But I think we're talking too much. I think we should let people bring up topics.
Any other topics? Oh.
Yeah, hello. Recently I read that Git turned 20, so I wanted to ask you guys, how was the work back in the day? How did you work with versioning and in those early days?
CVS.
SourceForge, CVS, and then Subversion, and then our own self-hosted Git, and then GitHub. GitHub's been pretty good to us.
Yeah, I wouldn't even separate Git from GitHub these days, right? It's really the experience, the collaboration experience on GitHub is, I have a hard time remembering what that was like before, but we were on Subversion for a while and CVS initially. Yeah, it wasn't all that bad. I mean, we got our job done, right? We got our collaboration done, but in being able to accept contributions from the outside, that's a wholly different world now.
We had SourceForge. Wasn't that the be-all, end-all? No, I'm just kidding. I kid.
Yeah, I think with obviously things have changed in terms of community, and CVS, as Juergen said, we kind of were able to commit code, but we didn't have this wonderful way of engaging with the community. And I think that is what GitHub, way beyond, they've taken really collaboration beyond just pull requests to this whole social model, and that's been really helpful for open source.
How many of you have submitted a pull request or an issue to one of the Spring projects? Engaged with us on GitHub? Oh, that's not as much as I would have hoped. Well, because it's very active. All these projects are always brimming with too many issues and too few hours to do it.
There's no complaint attached to this, right? It's like, like personally, I actually really appreciate also a well-composed issue, a well-composed bug report or enhancement request. It's just as useful to us and as important to us, as valuable as a pull request is, right? So, but if you already have a local patch, and quite a few people do this, locally patching, trying it, maybe even using that patch, and then showing us that it worked for them, right? So a pull request is a great way to do this.
How many of you are using GitHub versus like something else, Like, who's using GitHub? Okay. Who uses GitLab? How many of you are just storing it in a folder and hoping that your hard drive doesn't drop? Okay. It's a version? Anybody? Well, okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the great work for so many years. Sir Tony Howard just wrote the billion-dollar mistake about null being the thing that he would have changed in Java if he could, and true, that's the only major issue left after generics. But if you look at Spring Framework, of course there's nothing that's a mistake in there. But is there any feature in Spring that you think took the longest time to get to a point where you really feel satisfied, or some things that you felt from over the years have actually been impacted now?
Yeah, there's definitely different areas having kind of aged well into a different degree. But mistakes, no, we actually, you might not see it at the surface level, but we kind of redesign and reinvent quite a bit in the code base all the time. So there were definitely historic mistakes that have been phased out through careful reinvention and aren't even there anymore. Whereas other structures are still very much the same as we laid them out like 20 years ago, right? So there's both of this. The most important part, I believe, is the willingness to revisit a particular code base, a particular API surface, a particular implementation, and be willing to take it where it needs to be taken to. Right? We added nullability to the entire code base, just revisiting literally every single source file. We've had nullable annotations and stuff. Our generics back then, we had a pre-generics code base. We had to redesign the surface level for the use of generics. Introduction of annotations, right? Compatibility with Lambda expressions in Java 8. All of this we had to bring into an existing code base. And I think we managed.
I think certainly some things as well took a time to get right. So certainly the things I was involved in, probably the one that took the longest time to get right was Java configuration. So at Bean, which is obviously now very familiar core to how Spring Boot works, that took quite a long time, like probably a couple of years of iteration before it was anywhere near ready, because it's surprisingly complex in how it's implemented. Also the MVC framework, initially pre-annotation, it's virtually impossible to come up with a good annotation MVC framework in Java. So it wasn't really until the rewrite of that, which Arian did with annotations, that was really good. You
had base classes for Spring MVC in the beginning.
I fought as hard as I possibly could, but unfortunately without annotations,
what else could you have done?
A way around. I mean, we didn't have it as bad as struts,
no.
But there were some things where there just was no way around it.
Simple form controller.
Yes.
Yeah. And the wizard stuff.
My wizard form controller.
Yeah, I remember that one.
But yeah, it's this willingness to revisit what we do. I think we've always shown that we're willing to do this, but some things take time. And Spring MVC actually had even more iterations. The introduction of the annotation-based add controller at request mapping model was a huge initial step, but it was actually completely redesigned internally, like once in 2009 and again in 2011, where we kept compatibility with the programming model, but the internals have been completely re-implemented.
And also coming back to Juergen's point about how Spring actually had less influence in the earlier days, right? We were operating in a well-established environment. There are, in retrospect, probably some integrations that we shouldn't have done because we should have been more opinionated. One of them, for example, is we probably never should have supported JSP views because JSP was a terrible technology. But that at the time would not have been a viable option in the marketplace.
And Apache OJB. I still wonder about that one.
Yes.
Yeah. We had many integrations that were relevant for a while and then faded away. JDO we had.
Yeah.
So we
EJB.
Yeah. We phased out a lot of things carefully, so you might not have noticed, but a lot of things have been there and have been popular for a number of years and aren't there anymore.
Yep. So.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Which of the upcoming Java features are you most excited about, and is there something that isn't even planned for Java that you wish they would be doing?
CTO of Vaden, by the way, right?
No,
Yeah.
ish.
Yeah, there you go.
You said upcoming.
Yep.
So I'm actually most excited by things that we already got. So both what we have in 17, but in particular what we got in 24 is like an amazing, the single most packed Java release that I actually remember is JDK 24. But yeah, so I'm very excited by many things we got. But on a forward-looking note, I mean, there's a lot of promise. 10 years in the making that Valhalla will actually go somewhere. But in the more immediate timeline, what we get out of Project Leiden in 24 and what they already committed to doing in 25 is amazing. I mean, you could have argued they could have done this earlier, but I'm really happy that they do it now, taking the most out of the hotspot runtime engine. And it's the opportunities for kind of just storing a cache and reusing that cache on startup. It's not rocket science, actually, right? They do rather obvious stuff, but I think that's exactly what they should be doing, and they are delivering it on a tight timeline. So it's going to be ready for. It's already ready for consumption, but it's going to be very ready for consumption in 25.
Classless, just like me, classless main methods in 25. I don't know why I'm so excited about that, but implicit classes. The idea you can just have void main.
Yeah.
That'll open it up.
Because you do demos all the time.
Well, no, but I don't write that code. I don't write that code. That's for it's for the young people. It's the novices. That's what I want.
There's value in that. They need to be.
I want that to be as trivial as possible, because this language. You were saying this right as we were walking in. People don't remember Java used to be the easy language to learn compared to C++. Now it's become this thing that is like we accuse it of being riddled with ceremony. I just think it's basically not compared to what, like compared to Python maybe, but for what we had at the time, it was great. So having things like implicit classes and this sort of focus on developer ergonomics, huge. And then same thing, Valhalla. If everything in that slate gets delivered, if they get nullability, if they get the value types and all that, that'll make Java a thing that takes us into new places that just weren't and aren't conceivable today. It's going to be an amazing time. Just stay tuned.
I have a question. There was a time when Ruby on Rails, Grails, and Drop Wizard were sort of an inspiration to make Spring Framework more pleasant and easier to use, and this is how Spring Boot came out, more or less, or at least partially. Do you see nowadays anything in the industry, not only in Java, but in other platforms or languages, some concepts or framework features that you see you could either integrate or at least use as an inspiration for the future versions of Spring Boot or Spring Framework?
Well, one general point is as we move into the AI era, obviously there's a lot of AI innovation in Python. And of course, the Spring AI team are very aware of that. So, we are looking at other platforms. There's also, the synergy happening with the Kotlin team and some learnings from that community.
Picking up on the Kotlin part, I find, in particular in the past, when we started doing Kotlin first class in 2017 onward, Kotlin served as a huge inspiration because it gave us a different perspective on what modern day development should be like, right? And what a language can provide. Our whole nullability story is basically inspired by Kotlin because the immediate value with Kotlin, the Kotlin compiler, being able to do a much better job at adapting the Kotlin type system to Java APIs if they declare nullability explicitly. That was the first inspiration for us. Then we realized how much value there is even for plain Java language usage if APIs are annotated with that nullable and with non-null by default. So we were actually heavily inspired by Kotlin in the end. So what you now know as Spring Framework 5 and 6 wouldn't quite be what you see if we wouldn't have adopted Kotlin first class back then, right? So there's definitely some inspiration from totally other ecosystems. I mean, we always have an open eye on things, but it's more like there's a lot of consensus on how to do things as well across different platforms these days. Web frameworks tend to be a little like each other, so I'm not sure there's that much disagreement, but only from disagreement in design you can really take inspiration, right? So
And plus, the thing I love about Spring is sometimes when we have a fork in the road, we choose one path. If it doesn't work out, we can still do the other. So we have both controllers and the functional router style, for example, in Spring MVC, and they're both valid approaches to building services. And there's, depending on which framework you're using, which other framework you're using, you'll find an analog in Spring either way. We've got, what have we got, 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Okay, questions?
Yes, so building up upon this question, first of all, thanks for this format, I really like it. And given the clear shift in the Android ecosystem to Kotlin as its default language, do you foresee a scenario where Spring might officially adopt a non-Java language such as Kotlin as its primary or default language of development?
Like, what does primary language even mean in our case?
I mean, like the default in the docs,
like,
you can
the
just...
started Spring that I would suggest it as a default, or because we're trying to remain very agnostic. We're ultimately a JVM framework implemented in Java, not really very prescriptive in terms of how you need to do your application development, right? So I don't think we have this clear preferred language even, so I would challenge the premise to some degree. But pragmatically taking your question, I don't see that coming. We take it as a first-class language. There's the Java language and there's Kotlin. Those are our two first-class languages that we heavily invest in, that we heavily align with. I don't think we need to have a stronger opinion on this.
I have a question. Have you written any Kotlin code?
Yeah.
Yeah, Juergen Hoeller?
Mostly test code though.
Yeah, okay, test code. Still amazing.
We have significant Kotlin test codes. Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I'm in my just out of my history. I'm strongly a Java person. I admit that, but I have a lot of love for alternative language design. Always had.
One thing, actually, that I thought the question was really interesting about bringing ideas from other communities, other frameworks. One thing I would strongly encourage everyone to do, if you don't do it already, is spend some time programming in other languages. Like over the last 10 years, I've written a lot of Scala, I've written a lot of TypeScript, I've written a lot of Python, and I've written Java and Kotlin. And I've actually found that it has improved the code that I write on the JVM, that I've been exposed to those other ideas. So I think all of us as developers can benefit greatly by writing in another language. And to be honest, even though I don't love the language, I think Python is very important to be familiar with for all developers these days. There's a lot of interesting stuff is happening in Python. And if you want to be challenged to open your mind a little bit, even to something that doesn't always make sense, it's a good place to go.
And I would also encourage you to just upgrade Java, because today's Java is a very different beast than Java 7.
Yeah, upgrade Java and make use of what
Yeah,
you have there. Right?
that's a different language compared to Java 7.
The point of using Java 25 is not like coding like Java 8, right?
Right.
Make use of of the delta in between.
But I love the questions here, so
Yeah.
let's see how many more we can get through.
Quickly. No pressure, but pressure. Yes, you in the back with a hand up.
Sorry, that's me first.
So okay, no worries.
Oh, sorry.
The question is, hello.
Hi.
Josh. The Spring ecosystem is still evolving. There are lots of sub-projects. Some disappeared, like Spring Brew, and new appears today, like Spring AI. So my question is, in retrospective, do you think there were some errors that were made, or maybe sub-projects that were maybe not the right solution at the right moment?
OSGI!
Yeah, well, I think OSGI, I think, yeah, I would agree with that. With respect to Spring Brew, look, Spring Brew was an attempt to do what Spring Boot succeeded in doing. So, in retrospect, that project didn't really make it, but I think it had some good ideas, and it was a failed attempt to do something really important. Mm-hmm. And although obviously looking back, hindsight's a wonderful thing, I think a failed attempt to do the right thing is pretty much always worthwhile, because you learn through this. Like, we recognized that, we needed to deliver ultimately the benefits of what Boot delivered, and we were trying to find our way. And in hindsight, it's a mistake. At the time, it was probably well worthwhile.
And it was very much the point of us turning Spring into a portfolio of open source projects, where not the same rules would apply to every project, right? So sort of or going back even to the mistake question from earlier, whereas at Spring Framework level we very carefully micromanage every single piece of it. Other projects have more freedom to explore alternative approaches, alternative designs, and there's bound to be a degree of mistakes and failure there. That's kind of the point, right? So in that sense, I totally agree. We could have removed some of the efforts, efficiency-wise, if you look at the timeline, but from backwards, right, from now. But back then, we didn't really know what would take off and what didn't, right? Spring Scala was, we thought the Scala community would pick up on it, they didn't. So in that sense, was it a mistake to even try? Well, not really, right? It was maybe an investment that didn't pay off. You look at it like that, right? And some of our portfolio projects are exactly that, an investment that we tried. We tried exploring this. The most important part, you need to realize when it doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. And then you need to be willing to shut it down, basically, right, to phase it out.
One more question, if we hurry.
Yeah, here. Hello, guys. First, I'm really happy that I'm part of this presentation, and congratulations on the magic that you developed. I have a question, like during these years while you were developing all of these tools, which one of you was prone to perfectionism and which one was more easygoing with the stuff? And how are you handling these kind of scenarios? Because sometimes I get stuck in this wall where everything needs to be good and perfect, but yeah, it's actually mistake. And how were you handling these kind of scenarios?
That's a great question. I don't think we even have the time to fully address the general impact of that question. But yeah, I'm very much the perfectionist.
Yeah.
I think
I have some questions before we wrap up. A couple questions. First, which one of you is Paul and which one of you is John?
I think
I would definitely be John.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree that I'm Paul.
The way I would
McCartney, that is, and John Lennon. Right?
Yeah. The way I would put that is, I would be the one who would do I Am the Walrus. I occasionally do things that, actually I do like that song, but I occasionally do things that just don't work. Where
that wrote Let It Be.
And Rod, final.
George, though.
Rod, question for you. Your first time at Spring IO, having fun?
I am, yes. I mean, it's great sense of community, really hoping to talk to people. Yep, so far it's been a blast.
Would you come back?
No, totally.
Okay.
Well, you have to invite me back.
From Australia,
right? We wrap at 10:50, right?
We have this one question in the back.
Question in the back.
Could we take that still? Yeah.
Let's do it. And then
could you pass the mic back?
You've been
Just
waiting.
coming back to you because you've been waiting so patiently.
So patiently. There's a gentleman way back there.
Yeah, like him.
In the. Oh. Hello. Down there. Yeah. There we go.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm too excited. We are working in the game industry, so we are developing some real-time systems. Go is becoming a standard for the real-time systems right now. So what will be your vision to change that?
Real-time systems, that's an interesting.
So gaming industries, matchmakings, etc.
Well, that's difference between real time and real low latency, right? Like.
Yeah. Well, Java's trying to address certain concerns in that space through the garbage collection strategies of late, right? Where you can basically trade off towards low latency in particular, or also being closer to real time semantics or expectations. But yeah, I'm not much into that space actually. So in terms of Java, I think they do a great job in taking Java to wherever it can be taken. But personally, I don't have a problem with other language ecosystems being better at addressing certain concerns, right? So.
Is that time? Is that the time? Do we do it?
Yeah, we don't.
Okay. Who wants to take some selfies? Okay, we're going to be outside, I think, right? And I'm not going to let these two leave. They have to stay, okay?
Yeah,
so
we'll be around.
Come
so
say hi, okay? Come hang out. We'll take some photos. Oh, say. Oh.